Hello everyone, this is Pico Entertainment and we are back again, and here now we're going to do another fun video where I'll talk about who I deem were the most hottest, most attractive, most sexiest movie actresses of the 2000s decade. Now I did do a previous list for the 1990s which you can also check out on this channel, and I will leave a link in the description. And as with that video, don't worry, all images shown in this video will be safe for work, and all of this video and the content that I show within it is all shown in good taste. Now, as per that previous video, the criteria for this is that for these movie actresses, they have to have a substantial amount of lead or supporting roles. So this doesn't include any TV actresses from this particular decade. If you do enjoy this list and you'd like me to do a breakdown of the television actresses from any particular decade who I feel were the most attractive, then let me know in the comments and I'll provide a breakdown for that category as well. Now, I'll also take into account the profile of the actresses, their success in terms of their box office, and any legacy in terms of any award recognition that they attained during this decade. So I'll also consider that, as well as their looks and their image as well. So without any further delay, let's take a look at this countdown and take a look at who I deem were the most attractive and hottest movie actresses within the 2000s decade. So the first entry that we have on this list is Megan Fox. Initially starting out in small TV series early on in her career, she shot to international fame appearing as Michaela Barnes in Michael Bay's Transformers in 2007, which was a massive box office hit, grossing over $700 million at the box office. And for all the CGI and action sequences, Megan Fox obviously was hugely noticed throughout this movie. We have that particular scene where she's fixing the car, helping out Sam, played by Shia LaBeouf, and yes, we all noticed straight away her exotic looks, her toned body, and typical My Bait fashion. He shines in all this very high light, and she's got a super tan on, yeah, and she just looked very hot, very sexy, very attractive, and this is what really brought her to prominence well within movies. Everybody was going crazy about Megan Fox, and she emphasised this sex appeal even further in the second Transformers movie, Revenge of the Fallen. And this is a very controversial because the movie opens up where we see Megan bent over the motorbike as well, and obviously this caused a lot of debate and anger amongst certain people within the internet, as what you would expect as well. So at this point she was very prolific, and many feel that she could have gone on to be perhaps the most dominant female actresses, certainly within the next 5 to 10 years. But unfortunately it didn't go out that way. Megan didn't really build on the momentum of the prolific status that she achieved through the Transformers movies. She had a couple of other movies, in particular Jennifer's Body and also Jonah Hex, which was based on a DC character, but both of these were huge flops at the box office, and they didn't really help much in terms of the fact that Megan didn't really perform very well in those movies. It also wasn't helped by the fact that she was supposedly being fired from the third Transformers movies due to her alleging working with Michael Bay as to work with Hitler, and certain rumours decree that Steven Spielberg ordered her to be fired from the franchise. So going forward now, Megan really isn't prominent that much in terms of movies. She's done a few smaller roles in television series, but definitely not as prominent as what she was when she first entered the Transformers movies. But still a very good entry on this list. I had to put her on this list despite the fact that she hasn't done a huge amount of work, because at the time she was deemed one of the hottest actresses alive, and I think it's just a shame that she hasn't gone on to produce any substantial work prior to this decade. We go on to the next entry on this list, and that is Kate Beckinsale. The English actress, to me, has always been a stunning, beautiful, very tall, very lean toned body, and primarily she's been more of a supporting actress throughout this decade. If we look at the earlier movies, particularly from Pearl Harbor, where she starred alongside Ben Affleck and Josh Hartnett, and that was directed by Michael Bay, of course. That was a very big box office hit, despite the fact it didn't have very good critical reception. We also look at Van Helsing, very similar as well, good box office but not very good reviews, starring alongside Hugh Jackman. Her signature role really in this decade was as Celine in the Underworld movies, and this was a very hybrid of science fiction and gothic horror and action series. Kate Beckinsale, she has the short black hair, wearing this very sleek, tight black leather outfit. She looked very hot, very stylish, and that was really what gave her that franchise role. I mean, I enjoyed very much the first two Underworld movies. She didn't appear in the third Underworld movie, but then she came back for the fourth one, Underworld Awakening, which wasn't very good. But this was really Kate Beckinsale's signature role, and I think not only in terms of her look, but also in terms of her performance. I think she performed very well throughout the Underworld series, so that gave her that signature role. She didn't really build on it as much throughout the rest of this decade, but still she's been prominent today, and she's managed to land the future roles past this decade. And I think it's always good to see any British or English actress come through. And if we think about it in terms of this decade and afterwards, Kate Beckinsale has probably been one of the most substantial British actresses to still be present within this current Hollywood era. So stunning looks, very good performer, and very good as well looking in that Underworld outfit within those movies as well. So a very worthwhile entry, I think, also on this list. We go on to the next entry on this list, and for many, this woman would have been selected at perhaps maybe number 1 within this countdown, and that is Angelina Jolie. And certainly if we look at, in terms of just pure box office and major success financially and also maybe critically, many would deem that Angelina Jolie does deserve to be at number 1 of this list. You know, she certainly has, I think, within this countdown, the most highest box office success out of all of the entries on this list. And she really came into recognition in 1999 for winning the Best Supporting Actress Oscar for Girl Interrupted, when she starred alongside Winona Ryder. Despite the fact that was much of a Winona Ryder vehicle, Angelina Jolie stuck out, and she had this very unique look about her. She's very beautiful, but she wasn't the typical actress that we normally deem within this era. So I think that's what many people struck about Angelina Jolie, that she was very tall, she had this very slim toned body, but she wasn't your typical Hollywood actress at the time. She of course went into this decade, and that's when she really hit superstardom. First of all with the Tomb Raider movies, which I personally feel this is when Angelina Jolie was at her most hottest, I think, because she had that much more of a fuller figure and she looked like Lara Croft, and I think that's what caught a lot of people's eyes and attention. The Tomb Raider computer games were very prominent within this decade, so it was very fitting that you had an actress that could convey the same kind of look and style of the Lara Croft character, and that's what Angelina Jolie did as well. So that really propelled her to the mainstream box office, and she continued to have big hits throughout this decade. So she had Wanted later on, starring alongside James McAvoy. She had a huge massive hit with Mr. and Mrs. Smith, starring then alongside her husband Brad Pitt, and obviously their pairing was very much of a big reason why Angelina Jolie continued to be very prolific throughout this decade. She later on had Salt as well, very much of an international spy thriller, and that was a massive box office hit as well. And that was very typical, I think, of the star power that Angelina Jolie had. You know, it was very rare that you would have a female actress who would take much more of an action role and have it turn out to be very big at the box office. You know, we normally regard so many movie actresses for playing romantic comedies or period dramas, and that would be where they were most successful. But Angelina Jolie really broke the mold. This was an actress who could cross across different genres, different types of movies, and still be potentially very financially successful at the box office. And yeah, at this time within this decade, she was, I would say, the box office leading actress at the time. I mean, she also had Gone in 60 Seconds as well with Nicolas Cage. That was a big massive hit. So yeah, she had a consistent amount of box office hits as well, and into the fact that she was an Oscar winner, and she really was the leading actress at the time within this decade. Yes, of course, she was gorgeous, she was very beautiful at the time, but she gained much adoration and recognition amongst all movie fans, and I think that's why many people may have had her at number 1 of this list. I'm not so sure she would be at number 1 of this list, but overall, in terms of her movie profile, no doubt about it, Angelina Jolie was one of the leading actresses within this decade. We go on to the next entry on this list, and that is Jessica Biel. Just very stunning, very beautiful. She had that real athletic physique. I think she had a background in terms of gymnastics and swimming as well. Jessica always looked very slim and toned throughout all of the movie appearances that she was involved in, and she first came to prominence in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre remake of 2003, and she gained more notice particularly in the Blade Trinity movie starring alongside Wesley Snipes and Ryan Reynolds. And of course this was a disappointing entry within the Blade franchise, but no one can deny that Jessica Biel was one of the bright spots, if one of the biggest bright spots within that movie, playing one of the Night Stalker characters, and she had this great kind of comic book-esque tight leather arrow costume. She looked fantastic in it, and she performed very well. It was noted that she performed a lot of her stunts. Like I said before, she's very well athletically built, and she was very convincing as well. And for me, I also noticed she looked very stunning in the concept thriller Next, starring Nicolas Cage. and she played a very good substantial role which involved Nicolas Cage having some sort of mental powers when he could look forward or backwards in time. And Jessica Biel, I think, performed very well in this role, and she just looks stunning. Even though she doesn't wear anything particularly sexual without this movie, she still looks great, and I think this was her looking at her finest and in her prime as well. Jessica Biel never really had a truly massive lead role, so we will never know whether she could be a prolific actress within this period. She's still prolific, I suppose, in some limited capacity. She is of course married to Justin Timberlake, but she doesn't, I don't think, have the same kind of big profile that what she had previously within this decade, so we'll never know, but still a very worthy entry upon this list as well. So the next entry we have on this is one of the most famous actresses within this period, and that is Halle Berry, entering the industry in the early 90s with really what I think smaller roles in such as The Last Boy Scout, which you can check as well. I've done a review on that, you can check that on my channel, Boomerang, Jungle Fever and The Flintstones. But she really came to prominence in the year 2000 with the first X-Men movie, playing the role as Storm, and this is of course where we saw really the beginning of the massive renaissance within comic book movies. So of course, playing one of the most iconic members of the X-Men, she was always going to garner a lot of attention, but then her profile increased exponentially in 2001 with Swordfish, the kind of high-tech thriller starring John Travolta and Hugh Jackman. And of course this is very notorious because Halle Berry of course had that famous topless scene where she reportedly asked for more money. I think it was an extra $500,000 to make this topless scene. Although it's a quick topless scene, it's not very gratuitous in any way. She's literally just sitting on a chair. Well, I think Hugh Jackman approaches her. It did garner a lot of attention because Halle Berry is just so stunning and so gorgeous, and you know, you look at this decade as well, she was really in her prime, and so many people were attracted to Halle Berry. She just had this really simmering look about her. This was also very significant for her because she starred in Monsters Ball alongside Billy Bob Thornton, and as a result of her very, I think, intense and provocative performance, she became the first African American actress to win the Best Actress Oscar, and this really elevated her profile as such because now she had all of the looks, and now she established again that she had all of the talent. She could prove to be a really substantial actress, and her profile increased even more when she starred again in James Bond's Die Another Day, and this was very significant for a lot of us because she recreated that iconic scene by Ursula Andress from Dr. No when she comes out of the water in that orange style bikini, and she just stunned all of us, all audiences at the time. We looked at Halle Berry and we thought, yeah, this woman is very hot, very sexy. She's got this perfectly toned body, all the curves, smooth skin and the beautiful face as well, and this was really Halle Berry at her most prolific peak within her career. And afterwards, sadly, she would suffer a decline when she was starred in the likes of Catwoman, a massive notorious flop, and she continued that with Gothica, which maybe wasn't a terrible movie, but still didn't do very well at the box office, and as well later on with Perfect Stranger with Bruce Willis. So unfortunately she couldn't really build on the momentum of winning her Oscar, and her really career declined at this point to the end of this decade. She did make small appearances after that. We saw her most recently, of course, within the John Wick movies, and I think she's done a couple of television work now, but certainly within the early 2000s, that's when Halle Berry was at her most highest peak within her career, and definitely without that one of the most hottest and sexiest actresses within this countdown, no doubt about it. The next entry on this list is one of the most, I think, highlighted entries within all when we talk about actresses who are the most attractive of this decade, and that is Jessica Alba. Of course, the second of the three Jessicas, which I alluded to earlier on within this countdown. Jessica Alba was really more of a supporting actress, I think, throughout her career. Perhaps her most leading role, we could say, was the introduction to her within the industry, and that was within the James Cameron sci-fi series Dark Angel, which ran for a couple of seasons. And then after that, she didn't really have anything significant until coming into prominence later on in the role as Sue Storm within the Fantastic Four movies, directed by Tim Storm. And these were really a surprise big hit at the box office. I can very much remember there was much skepticism amongst these movies at the time. Fantastic Four, obviously they weren't as big or renowned as much of the Spider-Man or the X-Men, but they proved to be very successful at the box office. And yeah, Jessica Alba, no doubt, she had this highlighted blonde hairstyle and she looked great as Sue Storm. I think fantastic overall, even though it wasn't really, I would say, as substantial in terms of her performance, but definitely in terms of her looks. And Jessica Alba, yeah, at this point she was really deemed one of the most sexiest and most attractive females within this whole decade. And she didn't really have much more box office successes at the time. The only one I really referred to was the Sin City movie, directed by Robert Rodriguez, and she starred amongst a huge ensemble cast in the likes of Bruce Willis, Mickey Rourke, Brittany Murphy at the time, of course, and Clive Owen and Benicio del Toro. And yeah, she played, I would say, maybe a bit part role in the beginning of the movie and then towards the end. And yeah, she just looks fantastic in this movie as well when she's doing the whole stripper routine earlier on within the scenes within the movie. So very beautiful, very sexy. And I think the most definitive aspect of Jessica Alba is that smile. She's got just that great beaming smile as well, just very pleasing on the eye, very much so. And again, a very smooth, very athletic figure about her. And she didn't really build, I think, on the success that she garnered throughout this decade. She did have a few movie appearances, most notably I think within the two Machete movies directed by I think Robert Rodriguez shortly after this decade, but she didn't really go anywhere further in terms of a movie role or a movie actress. I mean, she's still very young, I think, very much in her prime, and she still looks great, so maybe she can make a comeback in the future. But I think definitely in terms of looks, in terms of sex appeal, in terms of attractiveness, no doubt about it, everybody loved Jessica Alba and thought definitely that she was one of the most desirable women throughout this movie decade. We then go on to the next entry on the list, and without that, one of my most favourite and most desirable women in my opinion throughout this decade, and that is Eva Mendes. Like, very stunning. She was born in Miami but of Cuban descent, and again very exotic looking in terms of her voice, in terms of her stature, just stunning to look at throughout. And she had a very, I would say, limited amount of roles in the late 90s, but she first got noticed having a very small role in the iconic cop thriller Training Day, starring alongside Denzel Washington and Ethan Hawke, of course. She continued her profile with the second Fast and Furious movie, Too Fast and Too Furious, starring alongside Paul Walker and Tyrese Gibson. And this is when I really first noticed Eva Mendes. And if you look at her, especially in these couple of scenes here, yeah, she's got a very hot, very simmering kind of Latina look about her. She looks fantastic on here, you know, very great, very pleasing on the eye, very statuesque look about her, and she was fantastic. And she continued, I think, to increase her profile when she starred alongside Will Smith in the very successful romantic comedy Hitch. She later on starred alongside Nicolas Cage in Ghost Rider in 2007. Now, okay, that didn't garner much of a critical reception, but that was a very successful hit, and that was at the time when superhero movies were really at the forefront as well. And she really established herself much more as a strong actress when she starred alongside Joaquin Phoenix and Mark Wahlberg in We Own the Night. And this is when, as I said before, she gained a lot more kudos in terms of her roles, and she always wanted to try out more challenging roles. She was very aware of how it looks and how sexual she was, and she really wanted to try more tougher roles as well. Now, overall, she doesn't really appear as much movies nowadays. She did have a few romantic comedies, but they didn't really go anywhere as such. I don't think she's actually prominent at this time. We all know that she's married long time now to Hollywood star Ryan Gosling, and they have a couple of kids together. So I don't think she's prominent now within the industry as such, but most recent photos, she still looks great, very fantastic, still slim, very beautiful, and without doubt for me, one of the most hottest and most sexiest actresses of all within this decade, and definitely a worthwhile entry within this countdown. We now go on to the second entry, number 2 within this list, and this may surprise a lot of people and they may not agree with me on this choice, but now we talk about Katherine Heigl. Now, initially she was renowned for starring in the long-time running medical series Grey's Anatomy, but she really shot to major recognition with the successful comedy Knocked Up, starring alongside Seth Rogen. And this was very typical of what we see a lot from the Seth Rogen comedies, where you have the typical kind of brash, loudmouth, very fat stoner character who somehow always hooks up with the stunning blonde girlfriend. And this is the case here, and I think Katherine Heigl looks stunning here. I was amazed when I first saw Knocked Up. It was actually a lot better than what I thought, and I think Katherine Heigl does very well on here. But yeah, I was just really taken aback as how stunning she was in terms of how she looked. She had that very much pretty, very sweet, tart looks about her, but she was very sexual at the same time. And she continued with successful entries throughout, where she had 27 Dresses, starring alongside James Marsden, and also The Ugly Truth, which I think was probably her biggest box office hit, where she starred alongside Gerard Butler. Now, I'm not as much of an enthusiast of romantic comedies, and both of these movies didn't impress me very much, but in terms of Katherine Heigl, yeah, she looked fantastic, particularly in The Ugly Truth, where we see her wearing these kind of very sexy outfits as such. It's not a terrible film, I suppose, but not a fantastic, but I think Katherine Heigl does very well on here. She had good chemistry as well with Gerard Butler in a supporting role, and yeah, this is when I think Katherine Heigl was probably at her most prolific, and many people deemed her as going to be that next kind of very big leading actress, certainly when it comes to more romantic comedies. But I think what hurt Katherine Heigl was that she would maybe do a lot of interviews where she showed, I think, as much of a dismay as the previous roles that she showed in. She wasn't very happy with the work that she did, and I think this upset a lot of the previous actors and directors that she worked with, and she also garnered a reputation for being very difficult to work with, and that always doesn't help. So this is, I think, what caused maybe much of a decline of her career post the 2000s. She starred in a couple of movies after that, but nothing was significant, and I think she lacked a certain connection with audiences. Many people felt that they couldn't relate to her as much, and again, she didn't really star in any major roles that broke away from the typical romantic comedy. So I think that's probably why she wasn't as successful going ahead later on after this decade. She currently now stars, I believe, in a Netflix film called Firefly Lane, and it's been moderately successful, I suppose, but definitely not as prolific as what she was within this decade. But without doubt, for me, Katherine Heigl, as I've showed in many pictures here, really that tall, stunning, blonde, very sweet smile, very pretty looking about her. So for me, definitely, even though maybe not a lot of people would agree with me having her so high within this list, without doubt one of the most stunning and most sexually attractive actresses within this decade. So now we come to the number one on this list, and this may agree with many people or may not agree with many people, but certainly for me, this is whom I believe is the most stunning and sexual attractive actress within this decade, and that is Charlize Theron. Sheerly just stunning looks, almost got that goddess like Amazonian like physique, extremely tall. The South African actress really had early roles in the late 90s to early 2000s, particularly looking at Devil's Advocate, which I think she is very good. I mean, I think that's a very underrated film, Devil's Advocate, and I will probably provide a review with my unrated, underappreciated movie review series of that movie as well. And she also starred in Mighty Joe Young, and these are very smaller roles, I would think, particularly with Mighty Joe Young, but they didn't really garner her much in terms of attention. But it was really the 2000s where Charlize Theron propelled to superstardom, and we had first of all the remake of The Italian Job, where she stars alongside the likes of Jason Statham and Mark Wahlberg, and I think that was a very good overall remake of the classic movies from the 60s starring Michael Caine. And then really the same year, that's when she established herself as a truly leading actress in a very compelling drama Monster, where she won an Oscar for Best Actress, where she played a prostitute who was executed for murdering her previous clients who she deemed were brutally and assaulting her, and she starred alongside Christina Ricci in the role, and she was stunning. And I think this really caught a lot of people's attention because we were aware of Charlize Theron, we were aware that she had these very supermodel type of looks, but if you look at her, it's very much of a transformative performance. You wouldn't even think it was Charlize Theron if you weren't told about it, and I think that's part of what made a lot of people appeal to this role so much, that you had an actress who was so stunningly wonderful and beautiful, but she was really willing to deface her looks a lot in order to take this role, and it gave Charlize Theron such a huge amount of credibility and critical reception amongst many movie fans. And yeah, even though it wasn't a massive box office hit, it still made its money back on a budget of $8 million. It grossed over $64 million at the box office, and of course resulted in her winning an Oscar. And this was really Charlize Theron announcing herself at the major stage in terms of what she could do as a leading actress within the industry. So whilst her films didn't have the same massive box office success as, let's say, Angelina Jolie, she still established herself as one of the most leading actresses within Hollywood. She really continued to take on more dramatic roles, so you look at like North County and In the Valley of Eli as well. Really, these were much more dramatic roles where she take on much more complex stories and much more complex characters, and again, she got very much of a critical reception. I think part of the reason was because many people felt that she didn't use her looks as much as, let's say, Katherine Heigl, and she was taking on far more uncompromising roles, far more difficult roles, and many people respected Charlize Theron so much because they didn't feel she was just using her looks in order to propel her career. Yes, later on she did star alongside Will Smith in Hancock, which was massive at the box office, but that was much more for just a little smaller role. I don't think she would gain much more recognition for that. It was really those hard driving dramatic roles that Charlize Theron took on within this decade and really established her as a leading force within Hollywood. Now yes, after this decade she would have prominent roles, so particularly when you look at the role of Furiosa in Mad Max Fury Road in 2016, and of course she would star later on in Snow White and the Huntsman in 2012. She would have little breaks between her career, but she came back most recently of course in The Old Guard with the Netflix adaptation, and I thought that was very good movie overall, and Charlize Theron looked stunning. She just continued to look great overall. She of course had Long Shot as well, starring alongside Seth Rogen as well. Very similar in its plot, I think, overall to what we saw with Katherine Heigl in Knocked Up as well, but just a stunning actress, and she can play any role, whether it's a romantic comedy, a romantic drama, an action movie. Charlize Theron just has this clear, commanding presence. You know, she commands your attention straight away. She's got that certain aura and sexual demeanor about her, and it's very alienating at times, but it's also very compelling to watch. And that's what I feel Charlize Theron, overall for me, was deemed the most sexually hot and most attractive actress within the 2000s decades. So those are my thoughts and overall feelings of who I deemed were the most attractive actresses within the 2000s decades. If you don't agree with my choices and you have a different list, or you feel certain actresses should have been put higher or lower than this list, then let me know in the comments. What other suggestions, what other actresses do you feel were the most attractive within this decade? Let me know what you think in the comments below. Now if this video continues to be very popular and people like it within the series, then I will of course do another listing for the 2010s decade as well. But if you have any other TV actresses, like I mentioned before, that you'd like to see me provide a listing for, just let me know in the comments and I'll provide a countdown for that as well. So those are my thoughts and feelings on the most attractive actresses. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Please also hit those like and subscribe and notification buttons and help me provide more high quality content for you in the future. But that's it for now. Take care of yourselves, stay at safe distances, and I will see you very, very soon.